Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are strapping on our virtual safety goggles and heading into what can only be described as a spectacular high-voltage collision in British computing history.
A very memorable one, yes.
You know the company, Acorn,
Uh-huh.
and you definitely know the legend, the BBC Micro. I mean, that's the machine that defined an entire generation of UK tech education.
It really did.
But what happens when that brilliant, highly innovative, and frankly a bit quirky company decides it's tired of selling to schools?
And it wants to trade its classroom chalk for, a high-end business portfolio.
What happens is a technical paradox of the highest order. We're diving into a specific moment in time, April 1986, and a pretty infamous review from Personal Computer World.
The machine under the microscope was Acorn's senior model, the one designed to break into the professional market, the ABC 310.
And this story, it goes way beyond just a simple commercial failure.
Yeah.
It's the tale of a machine that was architecturally brilliant but, well, commercially suicidal.
It's a fascinating case.
So our mission today is to unpack this source material and figure out exactly why the ABC 310 earned this terrifying moniker. Acorn's 4,000 pounds Frankenstein.
I love that name. It's so fitting.
It is, isn't it? We're going to examine how Acorn's sheer engineering ambition, all that technical genius they honed in the educational market, just completely collided with some very harsh commercial realities.
And that collision is the central paradox we need to explore for you today, because Acorn had the technology. They had the powerful Intel 80286 processor, the truly innovative tube interface for co-processing,
Right.
and the capability for genuine operating system concurrency. I mean, these were features that were technically way ahead of a lot of the competition.
Yeah.
And yet this machine was just universally seen as commercially doomed, aesthetically horrifying, and, physically intimidating.
So how could they do that? How could a company known for defining a revolutionary niche produce a machine that was, on one hand, a masterpiece of hardware architecture, and on the other, an absolute commercial monstrosity?
That is the question. And I think to answer it, you have to start with the context.
Let's do that. Because the ABC 310 wasn't born out of strength or confidence. It was built out of, well, sheer desperate necessity.
Absolutely. We have to establish the context of crisis surrounding Acorn in the mid-1980s, the huge financial success that the company had enjoyed.
The thing that made them a powerhouse.
Exactly. It was built almost entirely on the back of government spending and that seminal BBC Micro contract.
That contract was a financial jackpot for them. It mandated that the BBC Micro be used pretty much across all British schools. It secured Acorn a massive, reliable market share.
But by the mid-80s, that boon was, decisively over.
The well had run dry.
Precisely. The market was saturated. Most schools that were going to buy a BBC Micro had already bought their quota of machines, so that staggering growth just stopped.
And to make matters worse, their attempt to move into the home consumer market with the Acorn Electron
Was a significant disappointment.
It was meant to be the BBC Micro's budget-friendly little brother, right? To leverage all that brand recognition.
It was, but the sales were poor, there were production delays, and they were up against stiff competition from cheaper, purpose-built home computers like the Sinclair Spectrum.
So you have a company that has completely dominated one specific government-funded niche. But when that niche closes and their first big attempt to diversify fails, the entire financial foundation starts to shake.
Uncontrollably. The shaking was so severe it led to a full-blown financial crisis. The source material is really clear that Acorn was fighting for survival.
And they were reorganizing everything, their finances, their strategy, all under external pressure.
And that pressure manifested as a massive bailout and investment from the Italian giant Olivetti.
Right. The Olivetti connection is so crucial here. You can't just gloss over it. Olivetti wasn't just handing them cash.
No, they were taking a controlling stake in the company.
And Acorn's whole identity was tied up in this sort of slightly chaotic, pure engineering culture. Olivetti was this established, serious player in the European business machine market.
It creates an immediate cultural tension. Acorn's engineers, brilliant as they were suddenly under this commercial mandate from a huge established entity that was focused on selling professional, high-margin business equipment.
And that bailout put immense pressure on the new product line, the ABC range, to succeed, and to succeed immediately.
It was a condition of survival.
So that desperation, guided by this new strategic mandate, That's what birthed the ABC range.
Acorn knew they couldn't rely on educational hardware anymore. So the new strategy was a resolute, full-frontal pivot toward the top end of the single-user business market.
They were going where the margins were fat and the customers were serious.
And this was not a soft launch. The ABC range was incredibly ambitious. It had basic terminals, highly specialized scientific machines.
Right, some with that National Semiconductor 3216 CPU.
A technically advanced but very niche choice, yeah. And then the flagship models for the business office, the 300 and the 310, both based on the Intel 80286 processor.
The 80286. That is the smoking gun. That is the same processor, the advanced technology chip that powered the industry behemoth, the IBM PCC.
They were signaling their intent loud and clear.
Their target wasn't small businesses or home enthusiasts. It was corporate users who were already used to professional, high-end, and high-priced IBM equipment.
They wanted to capture the users who needed power, speed, and reliability. But this high-stakes bet required more than just technical competence. It required a complete brand transformation.
It's like a brilliant, slightly chaotic indie design studio, known for its fun, unconventional office, suddenly trying to sell a bespoke filing system to a centuries-old bank.
That's a great analogy.
They have the talent, but the aesthetics, the perceived reliability, the sheer corporate expectation, it's just a fundamental mismatch. And the moment they try to force that match,
the Frankenstein was born. And you see that mismatch immediately just by looking at the thing. The ABC 310's appearance alone was enough to derail its prospects before a customer even looked at the spec sheet.
Okay, let's get into that, the tangible, the first impression. Because before we even get to the groundbreaking architecture inside, you have to deal with the sheer physical presence of this machine.
And according to the reviewer, the overwhelming first impression of the ABC 310 was one of sheer ugliness.
Sheer ugliness. That's harsh.
It is, but it seems justified. It was down to Acorn's bizarre integrated design choice. Unlike the standard business model of the era, a separate monitor on top of a box with the processor and drives,
Yeah.
Acorn chose to house everything, all the electronics, the disk drives, and the monitor in one single integrated box.
That immediately sounds like a design choice forced by the engineers, not by what a customer would want. Why would you bundle it all together?
It was an attempt at consolidation, probably driven by the complexity of the BBC Micro's legacy architecture, which they were using inside. But the result was this slab-like gray and black thing that looked, in the reviewer's words, like a vastly oversized monitor.
And the physical bulk, the measurements really bring it home.
They do. With its tilt and swivel stand, the ABC 310 was 16 inches high, 18.5 inches wide, and nearly 16 inches deep.
Wow.
This isn't just large, it's an intimidating mass of plastic and screen. And in the mid-'80s, professional offices were starting to value sleekness and space efficiency.
And the ABC 310 was the exact opposite of that trend.
Completely. And the consequence of this monolithic design is what the reviewer perfectly called desk domination. The machine completely dominates any desk it is placed on.
This is a critical flaw, isn't it? When you compare it to the competition.
It's a huge flaw. If you bought the industry standard, the IBM PCS, you could usually put the main system unit, the noisy part with the processor and drives on the floor under the desk.
Right, freeing up all that valuable workspace.
Yeah. But the ABC 310 gave the user zero flexibility. Because the screen, processor, and hard drive were all fused into one unit, it had to sit on the desk just staring aggressively back at you.
A large, gray, immovable monument to stubborn engineering.
And while that slab was dominating your desk, the peripherals didn't help. You interact with the keyboard more than anything, and even that felt out of step.
How so?
Well, it was functional, sturdy, well laid out, but it attached via a coiled cable and a very old-fashioned 25-way D-plug. The reviewer specifically noted its chunky appearance and how its old-fashioned looks deviated from modern styling trends. It was a bulky throwback, not a sleek, modern interface.
So it looked old, bulky, and demanding. But looks can be deceiving if the performance is quiet and smooth. Which brings us to the noise.
The noise. It was, according to the source, maddeningly noisy.
Maddeningly.
The need to cram 5 circuit boards, high-voltage monitor electronics, and a powerful coprocessor into that one case meant it needed a built-in fan. And that fan was clearly not a quiet one.
Plus, the 310 model had a hard drive.
Correct. A 10-megabyte half-height hard disk. And that, combined with the fan, made the unit relentlessly loud. The reviewer definitively stated it was one of the noisiest I've ever tested.
Just imagine that. A 4,000-pound piece of high-end business kit in a quiet office. It's massive, it's ugly, and it's constantly droning away. It's an immediate distraction.
It completely erodes the professional polish that a high-priced item should guarantee. A machine built to win over business users just cannot be maddeningly noisy.
And that lack of polish leads us right inside the case, which is where we find the most painful reason for the Frankenstein name.
Yes, the construction. It felt crudely patched together, not elegantly engineered.
It's time for the legendary glue controversy. It sounds like an internet rumor, but the source is surprisingly specific about the pre-production lash-up machine the reviewer got.
The term lash-up is so telling, isn't it? It suggests a temporary arrangement, and inside they found the heart of the complexity. 5 different PCBs connected by a ton of ribbon cables.
And the securing detail.
The ribbon cables were literally glued onto the PCBs.
And he names the glue.
He does. The source suggests the cables were secured in place with Araldite, a common, strong epoxy glue.
Okay, hold on. Let's be fair. Maybe this was just bespoke engineering. Artisanal stabilization for enhanced conductivity.
That is a genuinely heroic attempt to save them. But the reviewer knew what it meant.
Right.
Using general-purpose epoxy to hold critical data paths together in a machine that costs the same as a small car. It's a ridiculous contradiction. It screams rush assembly, poor tolerances, or just desperation.
It screams, we built the brain perfectly, but we forgot to screw the skull shut.
And that messy construction led to some very real safety hazards.
This detail is just incredible. It wasn't just loud, it was potentially dangerous. The reviewer noted that opening the case was surprisingly easy.
Yeah, just some quick release straps.
But what greeted you when you popped the hood?
Immediate uncased exposure to the monitor electronics. We have to remember that CRTs, cathode ray tubes, they rely on incredibly high voltages.
I remember those warnings. You never ever touch the flyback transformer.
Exactly. The source emphasizes that these internal parts use very high voltages and, critically, can hold their charge for some time even after the unit is switched off.
Wow.
This made internal access more dangerous than it usually is on a business micro. To drive the point home, the back panel had a prominent warning high voltage label.
That really seals the Frankenstein name, doesn't it? It wasn't just monstrous in appearance, it was a literal electrocution risk if you weren't careful.
A spectacular piece of engineering packaged with total disregard for user safety. And if you navigated that, the back of the machine presented its own form of chaos.
The I/O port chaos, the visual evidence of their identity crisis.
The back panel was an absolute mess. It had a wide range of ports, but they were arranged on 4 distinct levels in an apparently random order. It looked like they just stuck them wherever they happened to line up with the boards inside.
Let's catalog this because it tells the whole story. You had a 9-watt D-ion socket for a mouse, or a BT link for a modem.
A modem that wasn't even connected on the review unit.
Right, a feature advertised but not delivered.
Then the printer port. It was a standard Centronics interface, but with a non-standard connector.
So you needed a special cable.
Exactly. The kind of friction that makes a customer just buy an IBM instead.
What else was back there?
You had 2 large D sockets, the 25-way for the keyboard, and a 37-way socket labeled 1 MHz bus, which was a direct connection to the BBC architecture inside.
And then the real legacy throwbacks.
On the 4th level, yes. 4 round DIN sockets for RGB output, an RS-423 serial port, an Ethernet network port, and, inexplicably, a cassette tape port.
Wait, a cassette tape port? On the 4,000-pound business machine with a 10-megabyte hard drive designed to compete with the IBM PCA.
Yes, the cassette port, the Ethernet connector, these are all interfaces lifted directly from the BBC Micro. It wasn't an aesthetic choice. It was an unavoidable constraint of the architecture.
That's the definitive sign of the Frankenstein. A cutting-edge 80286 heart. But the skin and sensory organs are from a machine designed for schools 6 years earlier.
It's the ultimate visual clash. The technical brilliance forced them into a physical package that was too noisy, too dangerous, and too cluttered. But we have to shift focus, because beneath all that Araldite and the high-voltage warnings, Acorn had genuinely engineered something groundbreaking.
Okay, let's unpack this internal brilliance. This is where we see the genius of Acorn's engineers and why they thought they could get away with the physical mess. The core architecture was based on the BBC Micro, leveraging a special port called the tube.
The tube is maybe Acorn's most underappreciated piece of tech. It was a proprietary high-speed interface that let a second, much more powerful coprocessor connect directly to the system.
So instead of a brand new design, they just grafted a modern high-power brain onto their existing successful platform. How did the division of labor work?
It created this symbiotic relationship. Once the coprocessor was switched on, the original 6502 chip from the BBC Micro was effectively relegated to being a dedicated I/O manager.
It became the system's receptionist.
Exactly. The 6502 handled all the menial but necessary tasks. Managing the disks, pulling the keyboard, handling the screen, managing all those legacy ports we just talked about.
Which freed up the heavy lifter, the Intel 80286, to do nothing but pure applications and number crunching.
It's a very elegant solution to a common problem of the era. This modularity was pitched as the machine's greatest advantage. You could, in theory, just swap out the 80286 board for something even more advanced later on.
But as we've established, that technical elegance had a massive physical cost.
A massive cost. The requirement for 3 main sets of electronics, the BBC board, the I/O controllers, and the 80286 coprocessor all connected via the tube, created what the source called a messy cat's cradle of ribbon cable inside.
It's the physical realization of that compromise. It made the whole unit way bigger and bulkier than a machine like the PC Addy, which was designed from scratch.
The physical layout was just dominated by the CRT monitor. The BBC board was below it, and the coprocessor and I/O boards were on panels on the left and right sides.
And these panels hinged outward.
Yeah. When a technician needed access, they released some studs, and these side panels would hinge outwards like wings.
That sounds terrifying, given the high voltage warning. Opening the machine like that, with the CRT unsecured, glued ribbon cables, boards hinging out, it must have looked like a bomb went off inside.
A true mechanical Frankenstein's monster. Yet the 80286 coprocessor board itself was technically brilliant. A minimalist affair containing the main processor, some logic, ROM, and the critical component, a Ferranti ULA controlling the tube.
The ULA. That's key. They developed custom silicon just to manage the high-speed communication between their old educational machine and this powerful business processor. That's a huge commitment.
They were absolutely serious about making the tube architecture work, and the review machine had a substantial 1 megabyte of RAM, which was standard for high-end machines at the time.
And for storage, besides the noisy hard disk.
One 790K 5.25-inch floppy drive. And it was pretty versatile. The source confirms it could read and write various formats, including the crucial 360K IBM and 380K CPM formats.
That was their olive branch to the business world. We know you use IBM, and we can at least read your data.
Right. And all this technical power did translate into real performance. The machine was exceptionally fast.
Not surprising with an 80286.
No. Running standard benchmarks, it recorded an average time of just 4.82 seconds. That put it firmly in the high-performance category for the mid-'80s.
It was technically capable, it could perform, but it had that identity crisis switch right on the keyboard.
Literally, a rocker swoke on the back of the keyboard. If it was on, the 80286 coprocessor was running, and it was a powerful business computer.
But if you flip that switch off,
It defaulted entirely back to the native 6502 mode. The ABC 310 instantly became a BBC Micro.
a very, very expensive BBC Micro.
Exactly. And that flexibility, intended to bridge the past and the future, ultimately just confused everyone. Which brings us to the operational reality. What software could this dual brain even run?
This is where Acorn made its third critical and arguably fatal decision. They chose not to standardize on MS-DOS.
A massive gamble in 1986. By then, IBM had established MS-DOS as the default. Acorn, leveraging their relationship with digital research, chose concurrent DOS 286 as the standard OS.
Let's focus on the why of that choice, because concurrent DOS 286 was technically a far more visionary choice than standard MS-DOS.
It absolutely was. The core feature was concurrency-true multitasking. It let the user run up to 4 different programs at the same time using 4 virtual screens.
You could switch instantly between a word processor, a database, a spreadsheet,
Yeah.
all running in the background. That's light years ahead of what MS-DOS users had.
It was a true power user environment. And critically, concurrent DOS 286 was designed to take full use of the 80286 processor's advanced features. This is a subtle but vital point.
Explain that. If the IBM PSIC also had an 80286 chip, why couldn't it do the same?
The problem was backward compatibility. IBM's PCDOS3 often ran the 80286 in its older, less efficient 8086 emulation mode to ensure it could run the huge library of older software.
So it basically neutered the chip.
It did. It neutered the 80286's capacity for advanced memory addressing and true multitasking. IBM chose compatibility. Acorn chose power.
They chose a technically superior system.
Yes. But as we see so many times in tech history, the technically superior product doesn't always win. The fatal flaw was the software desert.
The massive library for MS-DOS just dwarfed what was available for concurrent DOS.
It was a vicious cycle. Developers wouldn't write for a platform that wasn't dominant, and consumers wouldn't buy a platform with no software. Acorn tried to mitigate this, claiming the OS would have IBM emulation.
Right, the review said it could run friendly, well-behaved IBM format programs such as WordStar.
But that phrase, friendly, well-behaved, is the Achilles heel. It means simple, text-based apps. Anything that tried to directly manipulate the hardware would likely fail miserably.
And that uncertainty alone is enough to scare away any sensible corporate IT buyer.
For sure. To make the interface more appealing, though, Acorn did include a really important feature. DR's Graphics Environment Manager, or GEM.
GM, that was a Mac-like graphical front end, right?
Exactly. It used a mouse, icons, pull-down menus, a huge improvement over the command line. So you had a multitasking OS with a mouse-driven graphical front end on a super fast chip.
It sounds like a technical dream for 1986.
It was. But combining GM with a concurrent OS created another layer of insane technical difficulty. You have 4 virtual screens, each potentially running a different app, all needing access to the same graphical manager.
You can't just load 4 copies of GM.
No, it would eat all your memory. So the solution was to load 1 copy of GM that was shared across the 4 screens. This requires that the programming code be reentrant.
Let's pause on reentrancy. What does that mean for a developer?
It means the code has to be incredibly disciplined. Think of it like a manual in a library. 4 people need to use it at the same time. If one person writes notes in the manual, it's corrupted for everyone else.
So reentrant code means each user's notes are kept in their own private space, separate from the shared manual.
That's the perfect analogy. And it is much, much harder to program, debug, and certify than standard code.
So they created a fantastic house, but the roof required custom tiles that almost no one knew how to make.
A ghost ship sailing on an advanced, beautiful sea. And nothing encapsulates this operational failure better than one specific anecdote from the review.
The ultimate test of Acorn heritage, the cassette-based BBC software test.
The reviewer, probably out of curiosity, tried to run software on the 6502 core using that cassette port on the back of the 4,000-pound machine.
The chosen program, Acorn Soft's Elite, the flagship game.
Yeah.
The cultural touchstone of the entire BBC micro ecosystem.
If anything should have run, it was Elite.
You have the result.
Instantaneous rejection. It quickly bombed out with an error message the reviewer paraphrased as, "This isn't a real BBC, Sonny."
That is just devastating. The machine has the physical 6502 heart, but the timing, the memory mapping, everything the game needed was mismatched by the coprocessor setup.
It failed the family test, and it alienated the loyal Acorn user base. Why upgrade to a 4,000-pound behemoth if it couldn't even run the most famous software from its own company?
Subsequent tests with other BBC cassettes only had a 50% success rate.
The dual-brain architecture, brilliant as it was, couldn't guarantee backward compatibility with its own legacy. The machine declared its own identity crisis.
It was too expensive and too difficult for the business user, and too incompatible for the loyal BBC enthusiast. It lived in this dangerous, commercially unviable limbo.
Which leads us to the inevitable conclusion, the commercial delusion attached to this machine.
We have to start with the price tag, because this number is the anchor dragging the whole thing down. The review machine cost a staggering £3,999 in 1986.
Let's just pause on that. If we adjust for inflation, we are talking about roughly £12,600 in today's money for a single-user machine.
The source notes this cost more than a small car in 1986. It was firmly at the top end of the market.
And by setting that price, Acorn instantly forced a direct comparison with the IBM PC-RT. At that price point, customers are not forgiving. They expect polish, silent operation, and bulletproof compatibility.
And what did Acorn deliver? A noisy gray monolith with Araldite inside and a high-voltage warning that couldn't even run Elite.
In a vacuum, the technical conclusion of the review was positive. Technically, the machine was fine. The dual processor setup made it a very fast system indeed.
The OS choices were brave and powerful, offering capabilities IBM couldn't match.
The engineers delivered the speed and the innovation, but the commercial reality was just brutal.
So what were the other fatal flaws, beyond the price and the ugliness?
Well, the sheer physical size was the first failure point. It was an intimidating sight in the average office.
Then there was the sales channel strategy. Acorn planned to sell through a dedicated network of 50-plus dealers branded as business centers.
But their existing dealer network was set up for high-volume, low-margin home machines. They were retail shops, not corporate consultants. Finding dealers who could sell a 4,000-pound system against IBM was a monumental challenge.
They had the product, but not the distribution or support ecosystem.
And finally, they were trying to sell into specialized vertical markets at the exact moment every other second division manufacturer was doing the same thing.
A collective rush to specialization, because IBM had already conquered the general market.
The source calls it a mass attack on the vertical market. Acorn was late to an already overcrowded party and with a compromised machine.
So the final dilemma is that the machine was just stuck in no man's land.
Completely. Too ugly and noisy for the slick IBM business crowd who wanted reliability and known standards.
And at the same time, far too expensive and incompatible for the loyal BBC micro users that Acorn relied on. The elite failure was the symbolic rejection by its own roots.
It's a textbook case study in the perils of pivoting without fully committing. They carried too much baggage from the past, the tube, the cassette port, into a market that demanded a clean slate.
The reviewer's final personal assessment really seals its fate. After acknowledging all the technical power, they delivered the ultimate, devastating personal indictment. I still say that I wouldn't like it on my desk.
And that's the commercial kiss of death. In the world of premium business tools, if the professional reviewer doesn't want the machine screaming at them all day, no one will.
The Acorn ABC 310 is truly a monument to engineering ambition overriding practical reality. A dual-processor, multitasking machine that failed to run its own company's most famous software and was partially held together by glue.
It was a spectacular technical step forward, packaged as a profound, commercially fatal misstep.
The ultimate lesson of the ABC 310 for you, the listener, is the critical importance of external market realities. Acorn focused intensely on internal brilliance.
The tube, concurrent DOS. But they fundamentally ignored compatibility, they ignored aesthetics, and they ignored perceived quality.
And in the high-stakes business world of the mid-'80s, reliability and established standards trumped marginal performance gains and visionary but difficult operating systems every single time.
Acorn did survive, but only after falling back into the educational market. The ABC 310 shows a company trying desperately to leverage its architectural advantage into the big leagues.
They had the core technology, the tube, which was genuinely flexible. But that architecture carried the physical baggage of the BBC Micro, forcing the design into this messy hybrid that scared away the customer.
It did.
So we leave you with this final provocative thought. Acorn had the technical advantage with the tube. If they had to pivot to the business market, what necessary sacrifices should they have made?
Should they have ditched the 6502 core and the integrated design entirely, building a clean 80286 machine that was just tube compatible?
Or should they have compromised their OS vision and just adopted MS-DOS from day one? What path would Acorn have had to take to successfully transition their core technological advantage into the mainstream business world without creating another 4,000 pounds Frankenstein? Something for you to consider about managing pivot risk.